start, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the traditional owners of the Darwin and Darwin people, and acknowledge their elders past and present, and any Aboriginal people here in the audience today, and that the land we're gathering on has not been ceded. I'd like to, I think most people here are members of MAP and know who MAP is, so we'll take that as a given. I'd like to thank Andrew Belletty very much for being our presenter in the second of our series of seminars being produced by Katia Hedetskaya. I've called you the producer. So I think I'll let Katia introduce Andrew, as this is her seminar series.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. And I just wanted to say to everybody, so Andrew Belletty is Indian-born, Darwin-raised, Blue Mountains-based artist, sound designer, and also distinguished academic. His work focuses on the intersection between sound, culture, and place. And it's interesting about Andrew's work, it's very much influenced by Indian traditional knowledge. And I think we could say that Andrew's practice overall is mixing, it's sort of a bridge between traditional knowledge and contemporary art practices. Andrew's got a PhD in visual anthropology from COFA, College of Fine Arts of University of New South Wales. And he's a multidisciplinary artist, and also it's very intercultural, the work he does. So I also wanted to mention that it's mentioned in a few sources that Andrew's practice has been influenced by his experiences of being a founding member of incredible and very loved by me personally, and I'm sure a lot of people here, band Youth Indie from East Annamland, and also his significant experience extensive experience in working as a sound designer in cinema and film and TV. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
It's all yours now. Yes, thank you again.
Thank you for that very nicely put introduction. Yeah, how are you all? Very nice that you could come out on a day like today. Hot, but beautifully cool now. So with doors open, we can enjoy some of the fresh air. Now, I'm going to, it's a bit of a funny thing that I want to talk about tonight, because being a kind of audiovisual artist, I find that a lot of people, have kind of catchphrases about their practice, and I don't want to be another one of those people who's got a catchphrase about my practice. So I do site-responsive work, and I want to unpack that a little bit in terms of what that means as an audiovisual kind of artist. So I don't want to just gloss over it and say, well, it's site-responsive. So I'm going to do that with two very specific examples from my work in Darwin in 2024, this year. I've just finished, just came back a few days ago. And they are very, very good case studies on exactly what it is that I think is important for me as an artist. So the title is Listen Carefully, The Thorny Ethics of Site-Responsive Art, because I do find that listening, I suppose, especially in the times that we live in where, ubiquitous listening, like headphones were never a thing when I was a kid. You had to have a hi-fi system and sit at home to listen to your dad's headphones or something, but now everybody's got two pairs. They've got earbuds, they've got over the top, so they curate their audio space. Their audible input is always curated all the time, so they don't have to engage with the outside world. They can just put on the buds or the over ears and just walk blissfully across a crowded road. I'm sure you've all seen that. And that's a different way of engaging with the world. It's like, well, there is sound, there's stuff going on out there, but I'm curating my own experience because it keeps me happy or it keeps me informed, podcasts or whatever. So the idea of listening has become ubiquitous, but it's also become a little bit, I find, it becomes misunderstood in many ways because I go back to, I'm afraid you are listening to me, expecting to be put into an extraordinary state by some miracle, or you try to be influenced by the speaker to come to that state, but you cannot. You have to work tremendously hard. It requires tremendous energy to listen. It requires all of your attention to destroy inattention, to have no distraction of any kind, and there is no distraction ever to one who is attending. To one who is concentrating, there is distraction. So that quote to me sums up a lot of what I believe, and that is that listening involves attention. The real meaning of the word listening is, ordeal, to attend to. And if you attend to something, then there is a strange moral, ethical contract that you enter into with that thing that you're attending to. So I know Krishnamurti talks about it a hell of a lot, and I find it a really interesting now issue because attention has become attention deficit, attention, all sorts of not only disorders but perceptions of attention have really come into the fore over the last 5 years, especially since COVID. The last few years, there's a huge, focus on what this attention thing is. And I think, again, we can gloss over it and say, people who are hyperactive have attention deficit. But I believe that I have attention deficit because, I concentrate very, very, very closely on things. And that means that I can really, really, really focus on attending. So, so an abundance of attention also becomes a problem, right? So, yeah, the idea of attention and listening being the same thing is what I'm talking about tonight. Sight responsive is the other thing. What is sight responsive? It's, for me, sight responsive is not just turning up and saying, well, I'm putting this in a gallery space. It's a white wall space and the dimensions are 10 by 5 by whatever. It's about the sight. And to me, that involves a lot of things, which we'll talk about through the case studies. But for me, sight responsiveness involves positionality, which means that you have to position yourself as an artist within that frame. And whatever that frame may be, or whatever that kind of space may be, you have to position yourself in there. Then you have to attend to it. So attention is part number 2 of the process. So attention means once you are positioned kind of theoretically within the space, okay, I am from Darwin, for example, then when I go to Darwin, I have a responsibility to attend, to put my attention on the site. And to me, the site is not the gallery that I'm working with, or not the community that I'm working with, but it's a much larger site. It's like our own human body. Is it contained within our skin, or is it distributed? It's a distributed site as far as I'm concerned. So we have to look at things like, what is that site? So we then, after we've attended to it, we go back for consultation, and that may involve the gallerist or the curator, but it also may involve the community. So the 2 projects I'm going to show you tonight are very different, but they show you those 2 different processes. And so after the consultation, so if you're putting up a big work in a gallery space or an exterior space, you consult with the stakeholders, and then you decide upon your action on how you're going to administer, logistically how you're going to do it, how you're going to figure out all the kind of plans involved. So to me, that's kind of site responsive. Those 4 things I try to do with everything that I do. So basically it means that you're not limited to creating artworks that are purely ego-based and purely within yourself. So they're not, I don't look at the me in the outcome of the work or in assessing the site. I look at the site, the them. It's not only the people, it's not only the places, it's the young people, the people who don't attend, the nature. There's so many things that come into my consideration. So that's my idea of being site responsive. It's a kind of a different approach, and it involves much more community work, which I'm going to get to in a second. So for me, again, this is another big thing. Thoughtfully designing both the physical space and the interpersonal dynamics. Site-responsive listening interventions can create powerful opportunities for developing empathy. These approaches encourage participants to move beyond surface-level interactions and truly engage with others' perspectives and experiences. So that's the real crux of it for me, because I have a professional background in the film industry. And when you're designing sound for a film, you understand a process, which is that sound brings emotion. Sound and noise and dialogue brings the heart and the soul to the film. So if you turn off the sound of a horror film or of a love story or of a whatever documentary, 2 penguins running around, as soon as you hear the score and you hear the little scratching and the little cheep, cheep, cheep sounds, you're weeping. Because David Attenborough has worked out exactly how to get the sound effects, the Foley sounds, the little natural sounds of the penguin, and this bombastic score to tug at your heartstrings just at the right time. So sound for movies is very much based on developing a very temporary version of empathy, which is, you go into the cinema and you suspend disbelief. So you go in there, you sign the contract and say, okay, I know it's a horror film. I know nobody's going to get killed, but I'm still going to jump. I'm still going to feel scared. Or I know he's going to get the girl or she's going to get the boy or whatever it is. But in the end, when they start running in the last 5 minutes of the film and they're chasing the bus, your heart's right where it's right with them, right? And it's because of the music, it's because they're shouting out and, Stella, whatever it is. So you see what I mean? Like the empathy has to be there, and that teaches you a lot about how people engage with art. And I know film is a separate commercial kind of thing, but it still teaches you how these things work together. So creating opportunities for audiences, especially when I look at gallery spaces, which are, for me as an audiovisual artist, I find it very problematic for people to engage with work for longer than 30 seconds. They tend to want to go into the gallery and take selfies in front of works or just take pictures of the work as they walk around the space. And that's often a very superficial engagement with what's in front of you. And of course, my work is durational. You've got to sit for at least 4 or 5 minutes, otherwise you're not going to get anything out of it. So that to me is, the most important thing, is that how do you build that empathy? How do you get community to kind of care about what it is that you're doing? Because if it's just a big name coming to an art show, then that's just an advertising. It's a commercial enterprise. They just advertise it and people will just come regardless of anything else. But if it's you putting up a show that's responsive, you have to engage with people in order to get them interested. And as the second example I will show you, it'll have, a lot of those elements. So I won't bore you with any more PowerPoints, but I just wanted to get that out of the way with, because that's kind of the base theoretical, background for what I do. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to play soon But my job was basically to do what I do best, which is to get people together and do a sound system project. So the whole idea of this project was based on Julian is from Kingston in Jamaica originally. So his whole life has been devoted to sound system culture. It's about it's about the sight of sound systems. So it's about all the stuff that goes into it. So when it came to me, he said, so what do you want to do? What would you do? And I said, well, I'll probably go up to either Torres Strait, where I was working at the time, or Darwin, and just try and poke the bear and see what we can do. So I went to Darwin, and I did a recce first, and I found a very different town to the one I grew up in, and it disturbed me a lot. So I found it very over-policed, very concerned with law and order, quiet, not much going on, a lot of crashed cars on the side of the road, but not many people. And I found it very sad. I found it a very kind of, the vibrant town that I grew up in, had totally changed. So I thought, we need to do something with not only youth up until the age of 27 or whatever, but with the community who are working with sound and sound systems and music. We need to do something to try to activate them, because when I grew up in Darwin, we, as Katya mentioned, I was a founding member of Yothi Indi, and that came out of a workshop. So to me, workshops are a really great activation space. So I then went back to Sydney, or came back to Sydney, then I went back again on a proper consultation trip and found out what they wanted to do, and put my 20 cents worth in. And then when I came back to Sydney the third time, I designed a program. And I think it's better if I just play you this. When I was given the opportunity to do this project, I figured, what's a really interesting time of the year in Darwin? And to me, as a kid, it was always this season called the Knockem Down season, which is when the speargrass is at its tallest. These storms come and knock it over and bend it down, and then the dragonflies appear, and that heralds the first days of the dry season. And I thought, instead of waiting for the dry season to come as per the official calendar, we should just get in and do something according to the actual calendar.
It's great to have people from out of town who also know the place, like yourself, who come from here as well. And then I think that really, it almost affirms what we're doing here.
Good, humble Northern Territory musicians. Wouldn't see that in Melbourne, would you?
For 6 months of the year, it's oppressively hot and wet, the worst possible conditions for electronic equipment. When I look back at the songs that the Swamp Jockeys and Yothi Indi were singing, a lot of environmental factors were being brought into the music. One of the most memorable gigs I've ever played was at a base in Darwin at the Beachcombers Hotel, and it was an indoor venue. It had a roof, but it was all open on the sides. And we had about 1,300 people there one Sunday afternoon it was called The Rage in the Cage. And it got so intense, it was so packed, and people were dancing so wildly that it rained inside. People having to tune their instruments because the cicadas are so deafening that you have to tune to that same note. I mean, Darwin weather affects music.
One of the core principles of Darwin is community.
The aim of Knockem Down Sound System is to inspire people to get up on stage or to get into their bedroom, wherever they're creating music, and to do it motivated by me as an 18-year-old who we faced so many challenges to playing original music in Darwin. The younger people now face equally horrific challenges to getting their music out or getting their creativity expressed.
Here's your bloody country song.
So we have to really think about, why do we do this? And you guys made it about community, and you did it back in the 80s and 90s.
We did 5 days of workshops followed by 2 days of concerts. The workshops ranged between music workshops where we got young artists ready to get up on stage. We also had a VR workshop. Then we built the 2 G subs.
G subs, the sub boxes with 2 18-inch drives in them. It's part of a big sound system that I built with a friend called Speargrass Hi-Fi.
The reason that I love doing workshops is that Yothu Yindi came out of a workshop we did with the Swamp Jockeys in Yirrkala in the early 1980s. We met a school teacher who had written a couple of songs. So our guitarist Cal Williams, bass player Stuart Kellaway and myself had a jam with them and came up with a set of songs that sounded pretty good. The band started sharing a stage with the Swamp Jockeys, and it was pretty soon evident that they were the real superstars.
We're just doing this for us anyway, and for our own development and own skills. And I think that's a really great thing to do, and hopefully feel really proud.
What I was really knocked out by was that I was working with these people who were the sons and daughters of my friends. If you think about the Swamp Jockeys, we just kind of cracked the door open a little bit. But then when I'm hearing and seeing these people that I'm surrounded by in this workshop, they've just kicked it wide open. They're so much more focused, so much more talented than we were. We just had raw energy and enthusiasm.
I said to Ward today, I said, we've got to make sure these weeks aren't just like a thing that happens for a week. It's got to be something we actually think about ongoing. We've got to keep those relationships going with the uni, where they have said, you've basically lit a big fire into the whole uni and all the students are buzzing. And I literally watched people from Monday morning 9 a.m. to yesterday, their whole vibe changed, and felt safe that they had people who were great musicians and were willing to play with them and support them and make them feel supported.
I started writing songs when I was 12. The first day yesterday that I came here to do this workshop, I didn't know what to expect, but all I knew was there would be other musicians, and I was so stoked to be around people who knew how music can mean everything to someone. And then I went to see the sunset last night like I do every day, except I had a weird feeling to bring my guitar with me this time. And then all of a sudden I started picking and lyrics kind of just flowed out.
And the sound system, built by hand.
I've been building this system with a friend the past years. So I can tell you all about what it's like building a system in Darwin. I can tell you about all my mistakes, because that's half the process, is just learning from mistakes.
When he came to me, he had very little idea. He had some internet plans, and he said, well, what do you think about this? And I said, yeah, no. And we just kept it low budget, and I made it simple so that they could assemble. I was pretty keen. I had no idea actually what he was trying to achieve until I seen one painted up.
In a sea of black boxes, you look at Ward's PA and it is just a thing of beauty.
As a whole system, when you see it all together, it looks absolutely incredible, and it's going to just blow people's minds. Yeah.
So there's this huge knowledge exchange that goes up and down the generations. It takes a community to build a sound system.
There you go.
We first tested it in a basketball court at Charles Darwin University. Then we took it to Bagot, and Bagot hasn't had a lot of music there over the last few years. We used to do concerts there years ago, we're talking in the 80s, but it's been very quiet for a while, so we put this massive PA system in the church hall, and we blasted out some beats. We had DJ Charlie Templar and his crew doing workshops. And it was just this really amazing experience, because kids were just getting on the decks and they were getting up on stage.
And what about track one? Yeah.
Teaching young people how to DJ, and with those skills alone, it's not really sufficient, because a lot of young people here are faced with the shame and fear factor. So we did add the mentoring aspect, which is very powerful. So when they do that and they're into a point where they can perform on stage,
in return, they can empower their own people so that we don't break the link, it keeps going on.
I like both of them.
Yeah.
The DJ workshops and the DJs were a major part of the whole sound system experience.
I prefer to do workshops and keep my version of music to my live music. But every now and then I do have a bit of fun and go and DJ. But yeah, live music's my life.
So at Bagot, I felt that the bass brought people out of their homes. It got them away from their screens, and they turned up, and Charlie had all the DJ decks set up.
And you can see the engagement of the community, not just the young people, but the parents coming to support.
The sound system was like, it was rocking so hard that the roof and the walls were shaking. It was so beautiful.
It was amazing to see all the people that were involved in the workshops. Such a range. It's a nice little feeling to see what a sound system, and a system that I partly own as well, has done to bring people together.
When you find a song that feels right and your body's like, yeah, I can jam to this. That song vibes with you, like the vibrations are right.
So a lot of young people are starting to realize that, hold on a second, I'm talented. All I need to do is just that commitment, work, and maybe someone who will guide you.
Thinking of the word community, I think about the way that people exist, about the way that music and dance and sound and energy brings positive things to people's lives.
That's it, that's what you need to do. If they can see themselves doing that, that's where all these kids come from, and that's where superstars are made. Cuts a long story short about what we were doing in the project, and I think for me the documentation is a really important part for the community. So even though we didn't have a lot of money, to me making a video, which you can imagine when you screen it to, like, screening it to those young kids and the young musicians and stuff, they were just like, never seen themselves on screen before, never seen, that scale of stuff before, and it just changes people's perceptions, right? So all those little things mean that if you respond to what you see in front of you. So I saw a university, Charles Darwin University, big university, bricks and mortar, empty, not a single student, all online. And this is before COVID, because they focus on Southeast Asia, so they have a huge online lecture theatres that have been set up for online Zoom multicasting for years. So there's nobody there. And it's a beautiful campus, and they continually add to that campus and build more campuses, even though there's no students. And the music department had one staff member. So the whole faculty of the arts, I think, was 3 people. I met them all over coffee. 3 people. Yet the university has 4 campuses in Darwin, including in the very centre of the city. A massive building with all, I don't even know what's in there. There's just empty space. So I saw students who were just running around like, in circles, had no idea what they were doing. They didn't have any staff. The studios were all empty. So I thought, that's one place we have to go and do something. We have to commandeer those studios for a week and put some real musicians and engineers in there and see what we can do with some young people who've never ever played before with, those kids had never played with a band before, they'd never gone on stage before. So suddenly they were writing songs during the week. So that was one site that I thought we need to go straight away into that. The other thing was that technology was really important. So I found this guy Ward, who was building a PA system. And I spoke to him and I said, so what can we do here? And he goes, oh, I've got this old guy, John, and we saw up some wood and all that. So I kind of cooked up a plan to, use some research money to kind of get him to build some of these components during the workshop. And it was just, there were kids there who were turning up who were in grade 9 at high school, and they were just soaking it up. They just loved it because there was equipment and soldering irons and saws and oscilloscopes and, and there was really, really good people. So I had, really excellent engineers and sound mixers and all that on the floor at the time. And questions, it was just all a seamless thing. So people just turned up and they were knocked out. And then when we finally put it up to do the test in the basketball court, they felt this massive ownership over that sound system. And the third place was Bagot community, which was the Aboriginal community, which is right in the middle of town. And these days it's a big empty space because they don't allow drinking, and it's open for anybody to stay there, but a lot of people choose not to stay there. So it's only a couple of hundred people who live there now, but the Nat and the team there said that the kids are just, they've got nothing to do, they've got no activities, and people come and do hit and run projects and leave them with nothing, and they're all on TikTok and they start looking at all this, how to steal a car in 15 seconds, and they go and do it. And once they do it, it's a revolving door between Don Dale, which is in Darwin, the amazingly kind of high-profile correction centre that's, renowned for torturing Indigenous kids, basically. So they go in there at the age of 12 and they never leave the system. So that was and I thought we have to do something there. So 3 sites. One was a technology site, which was a sound system. We have to get this out there. We have to get the university and some of these young musicians activated, and we have to activate Bagot, because we used to do workshops there in the 80s and it was a much more vital space. No kids. There weren't any kids when I went there this time. It was all overgrown and stuff. So, again, using university money, we stretched a little bit of money a very long way. But yeah, we managed to clean up get the lawns mowed and repaired the electrical connections in the hall and all that through. And again, for me, my positionality was hugely, it was a big thing because I know everybody. So even though it's a long time ago, the guy who owns the PA, for example, his father used to photograph Yothi Yindi. So, so you've got all these connections so that when you call upon them, you've got a team of experts, and they're really good quality people, and kids have amazingly well developed bullshit meters, right? So they know when they're being spruiked a bunch of snake oil, but they also know when there's people standing in front of them who are very good and very talented and very interested. So, by putting those people on the floor at the workshops, you get this situation where the kids really respond well to it. So, the outcomes of this kind of project, because it was all research and it's all been written up in a huge report, so the outcomes were well exceeded what I could have ever dreamed of. So, you know, the, what would you call it? The small amount of money that they gave me has produced so many outputs and so many real world impacts that I think the report's a couple of 100 pages. It just goes on and on and on because there was so much that was done from that one little bit of money. So I think it was $75,000 to include all the trips, all the fees, all the workshops, all the documentary, everything. And Darwin's not a cheap place to operate in. So it was extremely good value for money for the Sydney Uni. But I'll just give you an example of some of the outcomes. So for the kids at the start, the young people who are playing music, who'd never worked with professional musicians before, suddenly they're getting gigs all over town, you know what I mean? Suddenly they're releasing singles and, you know, playing everywhere. And it was a really wonderful thing because I went back there a couple of times since, and just to see them up on stage with a new level of confidence. And, you know, the screening of the documentary was another level again because suddenly that's online and they can show it to their friends and family, and it's just boosted their, you know, their whole approach to their craft, which is, you know, something that you can't really do. You know, it's really tricky to do that in a small town. Darwin is still really isolated, and these people have to work very, very, very hard. The blonde girl who was Abby, who was the singer-songwriter at the start, we didn't get into it, but she does workshops at Don Dale, which is the detention centre. So she's only 17, and from the age of 16, she was going into a juvenile detention centre and doing workshops with male inmates. So they were between 10 and 16 or 17. So they were often younger than her, and they were some very messed up kids. But she was saying things like, and again, for confidentiality, we couldn't really talk about a lot of that stuff, but she was saying things like the guards were learning from her about how to interact with the kids. Because, you know, she had a particular skill, she could DJ, she can play, she can sing, and the kids were just messed up and angry, and they would take it out on the guards, but they'd be as good as gold with her. So, you know, the intergenerational thing goes both ways. It goes up and down, right? So that was a really interesting kind of outcome for those music kids, as I'll call them. Yeah, some really, really positive stuff on the Darwin music scene. The sound system, suddenly it's all over town. It's reggae gigs, down the beach, expos, it's getting hired. He's already been commissioned to do he's already done it actually for another festival to build another set. But his PA system, which was just a kind of a dream when I first started the involvement, is now a fully fleshed out. The posters are up all over town. Every week there's a different gig. And again, anybody who sees that poster who was involved in making that, those kids from high school, feel that sense of ownership. And who knows where this stuff leads to. And that's what I love about it, is that you just never know where these things will lead and what will, you know, spark in somebody's mind. So, you know, and that's why I take so much trouble doing outputs and making sure things have resonance and are meaningful to the community. Otherwise, a lot of people just go and spend money and it doesn't actually affect anybody, you know what I mean? Like people go, oh yeah, right. But I was so happy to see these outputs. And the last one was with Bagot community. The other thing that really upset me about Darwin is the multiple layers of, you know, you do have kids who are bored and doing bad stuff, and it is a problem. It's a huge problem for people who lose, you know, property, or they get threatened or with a machete or whatever. But adding levels of policing doesn't help. And what I saw was these private police forces that you'd only see in South Africa, or, you know, the transit police are on the buses. They have the power to arrest. They drive around in these massive SUVs. They're decked out like a SWAT team. They have tasers, handcuffs. They have a power to arrest, eject, interfere, do whatever the hell they want on a bus or around a bus stop. So all they do is they drive around town looking for Aboriginal people to hassle. They're paid for, not by the police force, they're paid for by the tourism department. But there's more. There's the Public Order Response Unit, another SWAT team. That's one of the old Chief Minister's mates opened a security firm, and suddenly they got a $6 million a year contract private security force, who surprisingly look like paramilitary guys. Again, all the accoutrements decked out with all the riot gear, and dogs as well. And wherever there's a black fella sitting under a tree, they'll go and harass them. And the ones in the city also have golf buggies. They chase people around in them. So who's paying for them? The Chief Minister's Department. So, and there's the City Council has also, the dog catchers have also had their remit extended to include the patrolling of foreshore areas. So now you see the dog catcher down at the beach hassling blackfellas under the trees, saying, you know, even people who are just sitting there, just not doing anything, stopping them from, you know, sitting, making them move on. And these are dog catchers. So you've got these multiple layers of policing going on, and you think, oh my God, you've already got more police per capita than any other city in the country. And now you've got all these kind of, you know, quasi kind of military or policing things. And it's a bad scene, because when you see that, you can see why people get so triggered by it. Because I'm triggered when we're in a cafe once, and these three guys walked in with their transport police, and they're all on their phone, they got all this gear on, and it was so intimidating. And they're the ones who stand on the buses and harass people and throw them out and arrest them. And anyway, shall we have a quick break and I'll get into case study 2? After the Knockem Down Sound System, I had already been in conversation with the Contemporary Art Gallery in Darwin, which is called NCCA, the Northern Centre for Contemporary Arts. And again, they're one of the glams, and they have like a 2-year waiting list. And I had this idea to do a very personal take on Cyclone Tracy, because it's 50 years since 1974 this year. So 50 years since the cyclone, and, you know, I keep my finger on the pulse of a lot of things that's going on around that, and there's a lot of bumper stickers, you know, I'm a survivor, and T-shirts, I survived, and you know what I mean. There's a lot of very kind of vernacular stuff that's coming out it's interesting, but it's not, for me, wasn't doing the business. So 2 years ago I applied to the Australia Council, or whatever they call Creative Australia. Yeah. And also to the NCCA, because they have their own funding sources as well. And yes, I got scheduled for mid-October to mid-November this year. And the beautiful thing about that gallery is that A, it's in Darwin, B, they do have a nice amount of funding so that they can, you know, get lots of things done. So that was really nice to be paid by them, and also to be supported with audiovisual stuff and people, and it was just a really good gallery to work out of. And the development work was all paid for by Creative Australia. But it was a conceptual work, and even the gallery had a lot of, they didn't have problems, but you know, it's hard explaining stuff that's completely conceptual. So And I'm not very good with all those fancy previs programs or anything like that, so I just kind of do some sketches or a bit of a collage, and it's pretty amateur what I do. But what I wanted to do is the gallery had 3 spaces. It had a main space which is quite big and an old cinema, so it's a really high ceiling. Then it had a room at the back, which is their video room with a small ceiling, and then a side gallery, which was kind of a nice, probably almost the size of this. So there was 3 really decent spaces in the gallery. And so I designed 3 works specifically for those spaces. But going back to the idea for the cyclone, I thought I needed to start from a very personal point of view. And the perspective for this was when Cyclone Tracy hit. My dad was in Darwin, but we were on holidays in Perth. So what used to happen in those days, my mum worked for the public service, and every 2 years you got an airfare for you and your family to go down south. So we'd go down south to visit my grandmother and auntie and whatever. So my mum and myself and my 2 brothers were in Perth. We went to Perth 2 weeks before the cyclone, leaving Dad with our dog and birds and whatever, and to look after the house. And he probably needed a bit of peace and quiet as well. And it was really interesting because my dad was a bit of a, he grew up in India. He's Sicilian, but he was living in India a lot. That's where he met my mum. And he was a bit of an adventurer, hunter and all that type of stuff. And he was really capable. So when it came to cyclone season, he would tide out everything, clear up the yard and do everything that he needed to do. So, but that night, and I didn't find out till about 10, 12 years ago, I didn't find out that he had started writing letters to us the night of Cyclone Tracy because he was terrified. And that was quite something, because I found out because I found the letters in amongst my mum's stuff in an envelope. And I thought, what are these? This nondescript envelope when it just had Madge Belletty, which is my mum, and it had a suburb which was like Belmont or something in Perth, Belmont, Perth. And that was all that was written on the envelope. And inside I could piece together 5 letters, and they were all dated. And the first one starts on the night of Cyclone Tracy. And they revealed to me a totally different side to my dad that I had never seen before. So, and as the night he survived, and then he kept writing the letters for a whole week, not knowing if and when we would ever get the letters, and not knowing if and when he was ever going to hear from us, because there was no communication. So we were just in Perth, reading the news, just seeing carnage and just going, and not hearing anything. And he was writing, and what was he doing with the letters? In the letters, he says, there were some people passing, nice people, they were going to Perth. So I gave them a letter. And, I got the bus to the next suburb. You had to get the bus because you couldn't walk because there was debris everywhere. So they had these little buses that were, were navigating safely through all the rubbish. I gave one to the bus driver. He said he was going to Perth the next day. And I'm thinking, my God, he was writing these in these letters. But the weird thing is there was no street address, because how did my dad wouldn't have known a phone number or a street address. He would have known Auntie Dot lives in Belmont, but that's all he would have known, right? So that's what he wrote on the thing. 5 of those letters were given to 5 different people. They all got to us, and my mum retained them. So in the long form of one of the works, or this one here, I recreate, because he was 60 at the time, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second, but he was 60 at the time, and he I recreated the bathroom scene of him and the dog and the bathtub full of water and all that. And I read the letters, and produced a kind of a condensed version for the gallery space. So in order to try and give a sense of that kind of isolation and just to really kind of turn it into an emotional space, I put a wall in that long gallery. I put a wall right here. So as you walk in, you can only see through the louvers or the bathroom cabinets. You can see through to the louvers or the cabinet. You can see through to the video that's projected on the back wall. And then it's only when you step up to the louvers that you can hear the voice, because I focused the speaker, so you could only hear it when you approached the louvers. So when you went into the space, you're going, yeah, what is this? And then when you turn, you see this kind of life-size image of me on the wall. And when you got closer, you could hear me reading the letters. And I was in the gallery once, and a woman came out, and she was just in tears. And she said, oh, sorry, she didn't know it was, and then she goes, oh, that was you, because I wouldn't normally be in the gallery. I was just sitting behind the desk minding the space for 5 minutes. And she said, that's you. She goes, sorry, I just got really emotional. I had nothing to do with the cyclone, but they were the most beautiful love letters I've ever heard. And I never thought about them as love letters. You know what I mean? They were just letters to my mum and to us. So yeah, so that becomes a very intimate kind of work, again in a public space, that kind of gives people who had been through the cyclone, there's no scary sounds or anything like that. It's just an intimate reading of a letter, and a recreation of this kind of very small bathroom that most people spent at least 6 or 8 hours in. So that was one of the works. The main work, I'll show you the video of that, as you walk in, was a Christmas tree upside down hanging from the ceiling. You'll see it in the video. And I had recorded a whole bunch of voices of survivors, but as part of the consultation process for the show, I was trying to reach out to people who wouldn't normally put their hands up to be interviewed. Because, when you ask for people if anybody's got a story, the ones with the loudest voices are the ones who scream. So I thought, I want to hear the voices of people who would not normally be heard. So we talked to some really interesting people who had nothing to do at the site, they would normally never do this type of thing. They did it because of a connection to me. And it's interesting, their perspectives, because it's so unsensational, but they're very real, right? So then I had around the walls, I had these small speakers and these seats so you could sit and listen to individual stories around the room. 14 individual stories. And again, you're kind of trying to harness empathy in a very public space. But given that, you had this beautiful kind of Christmas tree environment, it worked incredibly well. And people were very surprised at what the types of stories that came out of that. And the last one, in the small gallery on the side, one of the main criticisms that people had about any memorial to Cyclone Tracy, the Museum and Art Gallery had one up for 35 years that was a corrugated iron round structure, and when you walked into it, you just heard an ABC radio person had recorded the sound of the cyclone. And it was just this howling wind and ripping corrugated iron. It was just horrific. And everybody who'd had anything to do with the cyclone would be totally re-traumatised. And they'd run screaming, and they're like, that was just the worst thing ever. So, and corrugated iron was the most, potent weapon in the cyclone. It was what the wind picked up and turned into. It provided us with shelter. Every house had a corrugated iron roof, but the cyclone made that corrugated iron into a weapon. So I wanted to kind of really juxtapose that with, again, something that happened when I was writing this proposal in Hazelbrook a couple of years ago. That little thing there is a minuscule little feather that just landed on my desk. Little fragment of a feather, and it would move every time I breathed. So I videoed it with my little dodgy camera, and it just would dance. So every time I breathed in or out or moved, it would just dance around on my desktop. And I thought, to me, that is, you've got the corrugated iron, which I've coated in gold, of course, because it's the colour of, renewal, revitalisation, in a kind of Hindu Vedic sense. But, to juxtapose that as an object of that kind of, it's an emblem of the power of the wind. And then you have this tiny little feather that just dances so lightly and beautifully to the most subtle breath. And it was a really nice little space that we created. So this gallery became, it's got chanting, it's got tampura, as you'll hear in a second, a drone sound. So it's at the end of the stories that you hear in other parts of the gallery and the more sensational stuff, it's kind of the release, and it is the kind of idea of rebirth and renewal, because I never wanted to focus on purely the horror of the cyclone, even though the stories themselves, they're pretty challenging. So I'll just play the work for Gallery A.
1974, Cyclone Tracy came, and life changed for all of us.
The first sign that something strange was happening took place when my mother was putting us to bed that night, and we had a difficult time closing the louvers because the wind was so strong and kept forcing them back open.
We all went to bed on Christmas Eve, with the tree laden with decorations and gifts under the tree ready for the next morning.
It was blowing from 12 o'clock until 6 o'clock in the morning when you start to calm down.
The feeling of this is like I've been picked up by Cyclone Tracy, and then I feel like a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy.
Those of you that know what a Datsun 120Y looks like, it's this tiny little car. On the back seat, there was my mother, sister, myself, my brother, Marion, and a 2-month-old baby in the back seat of a Datsun 120Y, and we sat there for the rest of the cyclone, and no one said a word. The baby didn't cry. Not one word was spoken.
7 adults and 2 dogs. We crowded into the small bathroom. My ears felt like they were going to explode.
As we were almost across, the eye was over and the wind came up again with incredible ferocity. And my sister, who was only 11 at the time, was blown right down the driveway.
Being under the bed and one of the windows or the louvers shattered, and when glass shatters, it goes into small little bits like diamonds, and it filled up my ear. I was trying to get them out of my ear.
We were all afraid, what's happened?
You just wanted it to stop, and you prayed for it to stop. 4 or 5 hours of force that just wasn't going away.
After Tracy went through, we didn't see any green ants for a while.
I was shocked at the scene. It was just grey, just bare trees. I remember seeing no birds.
They all got blown away.
I survived World War II. I've been in a concentration camp in Croatia. I saw my parents being killed, and I was brought up in orphanage all my life.
The events of Cyclone Tracy taught me a very valuable lesson, and that is the most precious and valuable thing that we have are our loved ones. You can replace furniture, houses and personal belongings, while family and friends are irreplaceable.
Yeah, that was the main gallery, and of course that was just a very tight edit of what would be normally spun around, all around the walls in a whole lot of different listening positions. So, yeah, and if you look at the Italians, Greek, Croatian, Aboriginal, Anglo-Australian, Maltese, that was just in that small group of 14 people, because these are the people that I went to school with, and the different perceptions of what's going on, what's important. And I like the way that people talk when they're not in the spotlight, you know what I mean? It feels to me much more engaging and much more natural. So, yeah, and it was really interesting to see. I didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time in the gallery, but the amount of times, or the times that I was there, it was really interesting to see the way people engage with that work, because it's a big room. It's like 4 times the size of this with a really high ceiling. So when you sit against the wall, you kind of feel kind of private, and you can hear a story playing right above your head, whilst being surrounded by this kind of magical wonderland of Christmas Lost. Yeah, so it was really engaging for people, and I suppose the whole Cyclone Tracy thing is, without all the hype, it becomes, for me, a really personal thing. And then when you try to personalise that, you see the empathy come out in people. And a lot of the people who are really feeling a lot of empathy had no experience of the cyclone. Of course, there were going to be the people who'd been through it and they come through and whatever, but a lot of people had very strong reactions to it who had no idea about the cyclone. And to me, that was, that was part of the process, which was, engaging with the community, really working with the gallery to work up these artworks in such a way that they would work with the community and not put the community off. Because the other thing that's happened is that the memorial for Cyclone Tracy, the mayor is not an old-time Darwin person. First thing, he was going on holidays at Christmas time, so he moved the official date, so it wasn't going to be the 24th of December, which was the actual date. He's made it the 30th of November. The other thing, I don't know if anybody knows this person, but the other thing is that they commissioned, without anybody having any input, a kinetic artwork that turns out was going to cost $700,000. And as it turns out, the New Zealand-based artist never stepped foot in Darwin, except to take the money. Look, I don't know. That's what the people were telling me. A lot of very angry artists said, look, we live here, and some person just walked in from New Zealand, taken a big commission, and the work isn't even unique to Darwin because the work's been staged in other places around the world. So they were so angry. And I don't know, I don't live there, so I'm not part of that politics, but they were so angry. They just said, well, what about us? And again, what about the artists? What were they, how did they feel? $700,000, a lot of money to go to a overseas-based artist. Anyway, that's what I've been told, so I don't know, and there's a lot of protests and stuff going on about that, and they're very angry about it still. So in amongst it, I was providing, I did a few artist talks and for the community and stuff, and they were really beautifully received. A guy who's who I'd known many, many, many years ago, who's now a big player in Darwin politics, and he's on all the boards of everything. And he came along and he had this little bag with him, little brown paper bag. And at the end, people were, at the end of my talk, people were saying a few things, and he told us his story about Darwin, about the cyclone. He's about the same age as me. And then he said, and every year, he pulls out from this little paper bag a glass Christmas bauble. And he said, every year we hang this one from the tree, and I've kept it for the last 50 years. This survived, a glass Christmas bauble survived Cyclone Tracy. So he brought it along to show everybody. Yeah, quite beautiful. From somebody who's like a big, tough, he's like a big mover and shaker in Darwin. So I love things like that. So yes, there was a lot of engagement, and I think Darwin, 24th of December, 1974, Christmas Eve. Dearest Madge, I'm glad you're having a good time in Perth. It doesn't seem like Christmas without you and the boys. Even Dizzy the dog is missing you. It's been raining steadily for almost 36 hours, so I can't work outside. Instead, I'm playing all of our old records. I'm listening to Bing Crosby, his White Christmas record, your favourite, Doris Day, and mine, Hawaiian Hits. The 7 o'clock news is not so good. It seems that the cyclone is coming closer. Merry Christmas. I have brought Dizzy and Paul inside. I've filled up all the water and have fastened almost everything down. Madge, I'm so glad you're not here. It's only 8:30 p.m. and the wind at times is fearful. Our home is locked up as tight as I can make it. I have enough food, water and money just in case. Let's hope it won't be so bad. I'm watching the telly and writing in between. Paul is annoying me with his incessant "hello cocky" and whistling. It's 9:30 p.m. and it's getting worse. I don't think I will sleep tonight. I was expecting you to phone tonight. God, it is really bad now. The lights are on the blink and the telly is off. The torches are okay and so is the transistor radio. Thank God I bought extra batteries. If you could only hear the wind. Madge, it's getting frightening. I'm fully dressed and ready to move out if anything happens. The eye is expected to hit Shoal Bay, but no one knows for certain. The power is failing quite often. Even the radio is going on and off the air. At 2 a.m. the cyclone is expected to hit Darwin. That's the latest news. And Paul is in here still whistling and talking. It's 10 o'clock now, and I'm sure no one in Darwin is asleep. I feel sorry for my birds in the aviary outside being battered by the strong winds, but there's nothing I can do. Latest news, 120 mile-an-hour winds are expected. They must be about that now. Thank God you are all far from here. I'm not afraid, only prepared. Some instinct made me go to Woolies and buy nuts, dried fruit, powdered milk and cigarettes. So I'm well prepared with food and I have plenty of water. It is after midnight. A happy Christmas to you and my sons, Madge. All my love to you and my sons. C. P.S. Madge, stay away as long as you can. Cyclone hit Darwin at 2 a.m. Darwin is hell today. I was really frightened. So that was pretty much as he wrote it. You know, he was writing it over a period of many hours, so it's disjointed. But yeah, people really, and in the compile that you saw in the gallery, it was 4 times as long because I'd incorporated letters all the way up to the 1st of January, which was the first time that we actually heard from each other. Was the 1st of January, so a week after the cyclone, he finally managed to talk to us. So I'd included snippets from all those letters. The first one was there, and that one was there. It's in entirety, and the rest were truncated versions. But yeah, it just again, you know, like I think what got me about this whole process was, you know, trying to get empathy is really, it's a challenge, right? How do you get empathy? But in Dad's letters, in particular, one of them that's in the gallery and that we didn't hear tonight, he says, oh, you know, on Boxing Day, you know, a lot of people came over and the neighbours were here, you know, the bad ones. And they had, they brought their kids and we gave them, you know, I gave them lunch and because he had lots of food and stuff. And you know, and then he continued on. He never dwelt on anything. You know who the bad ones were? Our neighbours to the right used to, I remember when I was about this big, I was about 5 years old, I used to see our neighbour to the right, this kind of construction worker, used to tip his rubbish over onto our yard and call my dad a, you know, whatever, very unsavoury things about getting back up his tree and whatever. So that was the bad neighbours. They never ever spoke to us. They were just racial abuse is all we ever got from them. And there they are enjoying Christmas lunch or Boxing Day lunch. So, you know, it showed to me a side to my dad that I didn't really know was there, like this really soft and empathetic side. And I still don't understand how he did it, you know, like he was, I would find that difficult, you know, that's a very big thing to do. I would say, your house is blown down, fuck off. Because they made our lives, you know, and that was humiliating for him, for his kids to see their dad being, you know, racially vilified on a weekly basis in the front yard. So again, when people see that in a gallery space, they react very strongly to that and they kind of go, oh shit. Wasn't all roses, you know, like Darwin was multicultural and it was this and that, but there was always going to be problems in that, you know, idyllic picture that people have. And it was wonderful growing up there, it really was. And one of the Greek guys I went to school with said the opposite. He said, Darwin, I didn't know what racism was. But after we were evacuated, my parents decided to try and live in Melbourne. And we were living in a suburb called St. Albans or something. And he said, I'd never experienced racism before. And suddenly I felt like a wog. And I hated it. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. He grows up in Darwin and he doesn't actually know the concept, but he goes to Melbourne, which you would imagine would be much more kind of wog friendly. In those days, and he hated it, and he hated being in school there. And again, hearing those stories in a gallery space, you know, it just twigs to something different in your psyche. So anyway, I'll play just a Yeah, so again, interesting, that little kid there, I didn't realise it was him, but I was in the gallery when that little kid who was sitting on the chair was in, and he went out, he came into the gallery without his parents, they were outside, and he went out and grabbed his mum and dad and brought them in, and then his mum came over to me and said, he wants to tell you why he likes, or what he likes about each of the works, but you've got to start in that room. So I started in that room, and he's sitting there, and he's only 5 or something, and he's telling me everything he liked about the work, and I'm going, this guy's awesome. And he took a bike and everything. But yeah, so again, the idea, underlying theme of the exhibition was, revitalisation and renewal, which is an ancient kind of Indian concept of the golden womb, which is, it's literally a golden kind of egg concept, a thing that you can kind of meditate on or focus on, which is in Shiva, like you've got the Big Bang if you ever see the dancing Shiva or the Shiva statue, you'll see a little drum in one hand, which is the bang that creates the universe, the first impulse, the first vibration, and then a whole night of Brahma, which is however many trillion years whilst he's sleeping. And then at the end of that night is the destruction, so there's a flame in the other hand. But in that cycle, and that's only one day of Brahma's life, and Brahma lives a lot longer than one day. So we're only halfway through one of Brahma's days at the moment, according to Indian philosophy. And it's very close when they finally figured out the time scale, because it uses ancient ideas of time, the original interpretations of it. It's very close to what NASA believes the date of the universe is, which is really strange because they have the Big Bang and then the destruction, so it's a massive oscillation. So underlying theme of the exhibition is that. It's just that. Cyclone Tracy is what it is. You can focus on the trauma. It reconfigured Darwin. It made it a place I never wanted to live in again. One of the most significant things that happened to me as an 11-year-old was that when I came back to Darwin, 80% of my school friends had gone because people left Darwin and they never came back. And we didn't have phone numbers or address books or the internet in those days, so they left. So all the kids I grew up with, grade 1, 2, 3, they just disappeared. There was a handful of people who were left, and a whole lot of new people came, and they came for opportunities to rebuild, to add value, whatever, to Darwin. So when they planted the gardens, when they built the homes, everything was different. So, as you probably heard one of the guys say, the green ants disappeared. So not only the green ants, but because there was no leaves, the insects went. Darwin was silent for months because there was no leaves. So the wind had no voice. When there's no leaves, the kind of wind just blows and you can't hear anything. And when the new trees were planted, they were different varieties. So different insects came, different birds came, so that not only the place looked different, these ugly kind of concrete houses, but the nature has changed significantly. So it's like this marker in time, before Tracy and after Tracy, was like this kind of very unique town, and it changed, reconfigured in a night. It just reconfigured. Everything changed because, oh no, don't plant that. You can't use that. Yeah. Now louvers are outlawed in Darwin because they don't meet the National Energy Standards building code, so they can't even use louvers anymore. But it was really interesting, all that stuff, to engage with the community and find out all these concerns that they have, and and again, in putting together this work over 2 years, you have time to mull over it and ingest it and present it in the gallery space. And that was my kind of best attempt at that. And as I said, you know, the outputs of that for me were just spending a few hours here and a few hours there in the gallery and seeing the engagement and talking to people about their engagement. And that was significant. It was significant to see people empathising, which was my whole, you know, it's my whole agenda. Just a little bit of empathy. I don't want, you know, to create sensation or anything like that. It's just to bring a little bit of empathy to people. And, you know, the whole idea of disasters being a thing from the past, they're going to become much, much, much more constant in our lives. And the fact that we become bean counters, you know, we only look at disasters in terms of the loss of life and the loss of capital. So 3 people die in fires that caused $1 billion worth of damage. That's the only things we think about. And the human side is so much richer and so much more interesting, and it has to be done in order for people. These people have not resolved their trauma, you know. A lot of the people who went through it have not resolved it. So it's significant in people's lives, all these events. So I think finding different ways of projecting that, you know, like I know when we had our fires up here, it was significant because the animals and plants were not taken into account at all in Scott Morrison's plan. It was just, oh, we lost 2 lives or whatever it was, and you know, a few houses. That's all they cared about, just a balance sheet. But for us, I mean, billions of animals. Okay, I think I've said way too much. Again, you need the hook. You need to get me off. Has anybody got any questions?
What's next? That's a good question. That is a good question.
What's next?
Not tonight. No.
I really want to pack. I really want to try and get. I mean, surprisingly, I applied for the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre to get into their program for next year, but I wasn't successful. But I'm going to try to maybe try someone else like Orange or and then. Yeah, I don't know. I've got to start looking. Yeah. So that's the next step, is to try and move it around a little bit. And now that it's conceptualised and I've developed that concept into, you know, I've got good documentation now, so I can present it as a viable kind of show. It should be much easier.
So, but as a side responsive work, like after Darwin, would you continue working still in like Darwin, or are you thinking about what's the next? Like, is there any site that you are you know, you're eyeing at the moment?
I have to continue to use whatever I can in Darwin to try and build a little bit more there. So that's definitely ongoing for sure. Yeah. And there are other sites. Yes. So one project I'm starting early next year is going to be hopefully based around this part of the mountains. Yeah. And I'd love to do something. I spoke to the guys about the tank at the Sydney Modern, that beautiful acoustic space downstairs there, but it's a funny world. And I don't know if I've got the energy to tackle that one, but I'm definitely going to try and put in a version of the corrugated iron work as an acoustic work into the tanks. It's a very funny space though, and they tend to want to bring kind of rock stars in from overseas. But anyway, we will continue talking about that. But yeah, I'm definitely trying to do a project up here, which I'm going to be starting in developing in the new year. And I really want to start developing more stuff with South Asia, with India and Because I find as the population of South Asians grows, the representation is definitely underrepresented at the moment. So I think there needs to be, I mean, I can definitely start pushing that a little bit because, you know what I mean? They're a highly unrepresented group. So.
A couple of years ago, I got asked to write a paper for an ethnographic Canadian magazine about the hospital corridor at night. They were specifically looking at the nocturnal. And it wasn't until a year later that I actually read the other papers in the journal. And the really interesting thing that struck me was that sort of shift about how in ethnography and that way of acquiring knowledge, it absolutely privileges vision.
Yes.
And almost, but when you move that study into the night, you have to privilege sound.
Yep.
And it's a very, yes, it's something that's really, in my area of interest, which is the hospital corridor at night is a very weird space. And it is not so much the light, because there is almost no light in the corridors. It is the sound of the unattended alarm.
Yeah.
Somebody crying.
A lot of people awake, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's such a powerful thing, but it's quite often ignored.
Yep.
It's not part of the knowledge, in inverted commas.
I think the ethnographic kind of data has predominantly been visual. I mean, even when I did my PhD, I questioned that I was going to get given a PhD in visual anthropology. And they said, oh, but you know what I mean, it's, you know, visual is audio, all that stuff. And I said, it's not really, it's very visual, has its own tropes. It's scopic, it's kind of landscape, it's all these terms that I don't use. You know, I use terms that are much more attention-based. And yeah, but it's like taken for granted that ethnographic research will be, you know, visual. Absolutely. And oral cultures, Indigenous culture here and, you know, India, for example, there are still whole, you know, enormous amounts of knowledge that are transmitted orally that you cannot read, you cannot learn. So, yeah, and again, attention is all-encompassing of that. It kind of goes beyond, you know, the visual only becomes, it's like doing yoga and thinking that it's all just a bunch of asanas, just poses or whatever. It's just 10% of yoga, you know what I mean? It's such a big thing. Doing all your downward dogs and all that is a little bit of it. So the same thing about attention. Visual is like a small bit, oral is like a small bit. The mind has so much to do with it, you know what I mean? Your encultured mind. So yeah, I think, you know, moving away from this kind of Western notion of singular senses that operate together, you know, like tactile and olfactory or whatever, operate in tandem with other senses, but they're still considered as individual senses and they're not considered as attention. Whereas if you pay attention, you are used, it's like you know, the idea of a dog bristling, like the ears go, but it's not just the ears, right? It's the nose, the eyes, everything goes when a dog is bristling. So that's what attention is, right? It's your whole body is attending. It's all your pores of your skin. You're waiting to receive information, right? Up through the ground, vibrational information. I mean, it's attention is much more, you know, multimodal or all-encompassing. And so this singular sense stuff becomes, it goes out the door very quickly, you know what I mean? If you start going down in the individual senses, it's kind of peters out. You know, Doug has gone from sound into energies, which is, again, a much more of a multimodal thing. And, you know, and to me, it's more about a multimodal idea of attention, which is, you know, has to be bigger than than just that one sense.
Andrew, what's it, empathy? Why is it so important? Like, you keep repeating, like returning to
Because I'm
intention to, evoke empathy. And it's just that it was interesting to me because you mentioned it a number of times.
I think that in the current kind of political environment that I can experience, it's becoming more of a concept rather than a practice. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that fostering empathy, like real empathy, is it. As an artist, I feel that it's kind of my responsibility, because, I always question myself because in an Indian artist practice has 3 stages. The first stage is to master your instrument, whether that's your voice or your craft or whatever, your accoutrements of your tools, techniques. Master your instrument. Then master your genre, which is what are you going to do with that? Learn the songs, learn how to paint different styles or whatever it is. So master your genre. And the third is master your ego. And so the first 2 stages happen under guidance, under oral guidance with your guru. So it has to be taught to you by somebody who already has been through the 3 stages. And the third stage can only be, you can never come out and call yourself an artist until you've mastered your ego. So then you've got this idea that when you're not producing stuff, that's the first question I ask myself, is it an ego exercise? Am I doing this just so people can say, oh, he's deadly, or he's cool, or oh, that's a great thing? No, never even enters my mind. Is it going to engage people or foster empathy is definitely something I'm interested in. And that you have to remove the ego in order to do that. So it really comes from my Indian philosophy and my background, which is remove the ego out of every equation and then see what you're going to produce, because then you're doing stuff for everybody, and then the credits of the film become different. Then the list of thankses become different, and then the authorship becomes distributed. All good? Yeah. Thank you for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew. I think we'd love to have you back again sometime.